My mom ignored my wife's labor screams, so I cut her off in the most savage way. My wife was screaming in pain, about to give birth, and my mom, after years of treating me like her personal errand boy, chose not to lift a finger. So I made a decision that shut everyone up. But before I dive into all that, let me say this, I've noticed the channel's been slowing down a bit lately. If you're here and you like these stories, hitting that subscribe button is the easiest way to show support. It's fast, it's free, and it really helps keep this community growing strong. Hey Reddit! I'm 33, and I'm married to the love of my life, Brooke. She's got this quiet strength to her, grounded, compassionate, steady. She's everything I'm not when I start carrying the weight of everyone else's mess like it's mine to fix. We've been together 6 years, married for 3, and this year was supposed to be the start of something incredible. We were expecting our first child, a little girl. We even picked out her name early, Riley. But what happened the night Brooke went into labor flipped my whole world upside down. For the first time, I started questioning the blind loyalty I'd given my mom for over 30 years. I was raised by a single mom. My dad walked out when I was about 5, and it was just me and mom after that. Her name's Denise. And I won't lie, she worked hard. But somewhere along the way, the struggle kind of warped her. Or maybe she just started believing love had to be transactional. I got my first job at 18, and from then on, I was helping her cover rent whenever she was short. Groceries, car repairs, you name it. Even when I was in college, I juggled classes and back-to-back shifts so she wouldn't have to go without. After graduation, I landed a decent job in tech. My paycheck doubled, and so did her expectations. At first, it was just little things. A bill here, new tires there. But it didn't take long before she stopped acting like it was temporary. She used to laugh and call me her little investment, like she'd raised me just so I could take care of her. At first, I brushed it off as her being quirky. I figured I owed her. She'd given up a lot for me, right? But when Brooke and I got serious, it became harder to ignore. Brooke saw it for what it was. She told me straight up, my mom didn't see me as her son. I was more like a walking bank account who sometimes dropped off groceries. Still, I couldn't cut ties. Not after everything she'd done to raise me. So, even after we got married, I kept sending her money. When we bought our first house, she assumed she'd get her own room, even though we could barely afford the place. And when Brooke got pregnant, I asked mom if she could help out. Nothing big. Just be around. Lend a hand. Her answer? She said she was too tired. That she was too old to play the role of nursemaid. Then came the night everything snapped. Brooke went into labor 2 weeks early. The contractions hit hard and fast. It was 1:30 in the morning. I grabbed my phone and called my mom, practically begging her to come over and stay with our dog so I could rush Brooke to the hospital. It wasn't a big ask. She lived just across town. It would have taken 15 minutes, tops. Her response? Why are you calling me this late? I need my sleep. Can't you just leave food out and go? I was in shock. I told her Brooke was in real pain, that the baby was on the way. She let out this heavy, dramatic sigh and said, "That's not my problem." She repeated it, like a knife to the gut. I hung up, numb. My hands were shaking. But I focused on what mattered. I helped Brooke into the car, left the dog with enough food and water, and drove like my life depended on it. My mind raced with panic, but underneath all that was one bitter truth. My own mother couldn't be bothered to care. Brooke gave birth to our daughter after 14 grueling hours. It was the scariest, most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. I held Riley in my arms and cried, but deep down, there was this cold, heavy ache that wouldn't go away. And then the silence started. Days went by. No call from my mom. No text. Not even a half-hearted congratulations. She knew Brooke was due. She knew I had begged her for help. And yet, she chose to disappear completely. When we finally brought Riley home from the hospital, I sat down at the edge of our bed and told Brooke everything that had happened that night. The phone call. My mom's refusal. All of it. Brooke didn't react with shock. She stayed calm. But I saw it in her eyes. She had been done with my mother for a long time. I was just now catching up to where she'd already been emotionally. The following weekend, my mom finally decided to call. Not to check on the baby. Not to ask how Brooke was holding up. No, she called because she needed money. Her heater had broken, and she didn't want to dip into her emergency fund. Why? Because she was saving that for a church group trip to Miami. I just sat there staring at the phone, stunned. My daughter, barely a week old, was asleep in my arms, her tiny breath warm against my neck. And here was my mother, acting like none of it had happened, like the past 2 weeks didn't exist. Just asking for cash like it was business as usual. So I said no. For the first time in my life, I told her no. Her tone changed instantly. She accused me of being ungrateful. Said Brooke was manipulating me. That I was turning my back on family. That word family was the last straw. I told her real family doesn't hang up the phone when you're begging for help in the middle of the night. Real family doesn't ignore the birth of their grandchild because they're too tired. Real family doesn't drain you for decades and then act like you're the bad guy when you finally draw the line. She hung up on me this time. I figured that would be the end of it, but the next day, she showed up at our door. Brooke was still recovering, physically and emotionally exhausted. I told her to stay in the bedroom, and I went to deal with it myself. My mom barged in like she owned the place, demanding to see Riley and acting like nothing had happened. Like we could just go back to normal. I didn't let her pass the front hallway. I told her, straight up, she wasn't welcome in our lives anymore. Not unless she could admit how she had used me for years. Not unless she apologized for abandoning me when I needed her most. Not unless she stopped confusing control with love. She lost it. screamed that I was heartless, that I was choosing my wife over my own flesh and blood. I didn't argue. I just looked her in the eye and said, "You're right. I am. I chose the woman who had never once turned her back on me, who carried our child for 9 months, who held my hand through the worst pain of her life while my own mother shut off her phone and rolled over. And then I did something I never thought I had the strength to do. I blocked her number. I cut off the money. I chose peace over guilt." The silence that followed was loud in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time in years, there were no constant calls, no guilt trips disguised as conversations, no sudden emergencies that somehow only I could fix. Just stillness. And in that stillness, I started to breathe. I started to heal. I realized something huge. Real love isn't about how much pain you're willing to endure for someone. It's about what you create together, what you nurture and grow. Brooke and I were building something beautiful. A family. And I wasn't going to let the weight of the past wreck that. But just when I thought we had turned the corner, when I finally felt like the dust had settled, my cousin Amber called. And what she said chilled me to my core. Apparently, my mother had been running her mouth to anyone in the family who would listen, telling them I'd abandoned her in her old age, that Brooke was keeping Riley away from her, that I'd turned greedy and selfish. But the worst part? She wasn't just talking. She was making financial moves behind my back. That's when I realized this wasn't over. Not even close. And what I did next was the move that finally left everyone speechless. After Amber told me everything my mom had been saying, I felt this overwhelming mix of shame and fury. She had turned her back on me when I needed her most, and now she was playing the victim, painting me as the villain in a story she wrote herself. She had twisted the story so badly that some of my relatives started sending me these passive-aggressive texts loaded with guilt. Messages like, "We always knew Brooke would pull you away from the family," or "You've changed. You're not the son we used to know." And sure, I expected some backlash, but what really pushed me over the edge was what Amber said just before we ended the call. "You might want to check your credit history," she said, a little hesitant. "I don't want to freak you out, but I overheard Denise saying something about a backup account, and she mentioned your name." My stomach dropped. See, a few years ago back when I was still the naive, loyal son just trying to help his struggling mom, I made a big mistake. I co-signed a credit card for her. At the time, I honestly believed it would help her rebuild her credit. She'd promised me it would only be used for essentials, groceries, true emergencies, that sort of thing. And for a while, it seemed like she stuck to that. Or at least, she never gave me a reason to doubt her. Eventually, she told me she'd cut the card up because she had gotten one in her own name. I took her word for it and never looked back. But after Amber's warning, I logged in to check that old account, and what I saw nearly made me black out from sheer rage. Over $14,000 in brand new charges. Turns out, the last 4 months had been a full-blown shopping spree, flights, spa packages, designer shoes, non-stop Amazon deliveries, and even an entire living room set. She hadn't just dusted off the card, she had maxed it out and hadn't made a single minimum payment. She didn't cut it up. She kept it tucked away like some insurance policy, and the second I stopped wiring her money, she activated her plan B, me. I just sat there in silence for a long time, watching my baby girl sleep, one tiny hand tucked against her cheek like the world was still soft and safe. And my blood was boiling. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was straight up fraud. Theft. A betrayal so deep, it shook something loose in me. The next morning, I gathered every bit of paperwork I had and marched into the bank. I froze the card immediately. Then I disputed every charge. I explained the whole situation, that I hadn't used the card, hadn't authorized any of those purchases, and that the account had been dormant for years until now. And then I did something I never imagined myself doing. I filed a police report against my own mother. I knew it could blow things up even more, but I refused to sit back and let her wreck my credit and my life because she thought I was still hers to bleed dry. Then I made a bold move. One I wasn't sure I had the nerve for until that moment. I called a family meeting. I messaged every relative who had texted me, everyone who had taken her side or accused me of changing. I didn't ask them to come to her place. I told them to come to my house. I said, "I have something to show you." Only 5 people actually showed up. Didn't matter. I came prepared. I had printouts of everything. I showed them the credit card statements, line by line. I pointed out the charges proof that while she claimed she was struggling, she was actually booking flights and hotels in Miami. I laid out screenshots of her asking me for money in the exact same week she spent over $1,000 on clothes. I walked them through what happened the night Brooke went into labor, how I called in desperation, and she brushed me off like it was an inconvenience. How she never called, never asked about the baby, never even acknowledged that her granddaughter had been born. I didn't yell. I didn't put on a show. I just laid down the facts. Most of them were stunned. Speechless. One of my aunts actually started crying. At least she had the decency to. One of them tried to defend her until I pulled out a screenshot of a text she'd sent, calling Brooke a controlling gold digger. That shut things down fast. I ended the meeting right then. I told them straight, I was done. If they wanted to stay in my life, they could, but not if they kept bringing her up. Not if they kept pretending this was just some simple misunderstanding between a mother and her son. Because it wasn't. This wasn't about one bad moment or a few harsh words. It was about years, decades of emotional and financial abuse. And I was finally done being her victim. That night, she left me a voicemail. Crying. Hysterical. Barely coherent. She said I had humiliated her. That I was killing her with stress. She begged me to drop the police report. Reminded me that I was her only child. Said I owed her. I didn't call back. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. She was officially disputing the credit card charges, claiming I had always let her use the card. That she had my permission. That everything had been approved. So I made my final move. I hired a lawyer. I had him sever every last financial tie. I had her removed as my emergency contact. I blocked her number, her email, everything. Then I had the attorney send a cease and desist letter, warning her that if she ever used my name or personal information again, I would press charges. Criminal charges. When I told Brooke, she cried. Not from sadness, relief. She held me tight and whispered, "Thank you." I hadn't realized how heavy that burden was until I finally set it down. The next few weeks were a reset. We settled into life with Riley. I took paternity leave and spent every waking minute I could just holding her, rocking her, memorizing her every tiny expression. Brooke healed. We healed. And, for the first time in I don't know how long, the house was quiet, peaceful, whole. The calls from relatives slowed, then stopped. People picked sides. Some kept their distance. Others reached out quietly, apologetically. I didn't chase anyone. I didn't explain myself anymore. I had my family now. One morning, while Brooke was changing Riley's diaper, our daughter started giggling, this wild, pure little laugh that came out of nowhere, and it felt like the whole world reset. There was no weight in that sound. No bitterness. No shame. Just life. New. Honest. Uncomplicated. 3 months later, one last letter showed up in the mail. No return address. Handwritten. It was from my mother. She said she didn't understand how I could do this to her. That she'd raised me alone. That she'd sacrificed for me. That she had loved me in her own way. Still no apology. Still no mention of Riley. She ended it with one last sentence. "One day, you'll see how much you've hurt me." I folded the letter and tossed it into the fire. I'd seen enough. I didn't need her kind of love anymore. I didn't need to be the family's emergency fund or emotional punching bag. I didn't need the guilt. What I needed was already here, Brooke. Riley. Our quiet home. The life we were building with intention, not obligation. We were starting fresh. Free of chains. That was the last move I made. And it was the one that left them speechless.